ready. My name is Rodney Stringfellow. I am an adjunct professor in film studies at UNC Charlotte. I'm also a professional screenwriter. I work primarily in children's television. And so this is my jam. And so interesting, I noticed I'm currently working with one of the people featured in it, so at Fred Rogers. So I love this world.
Good evening. My name is Alesha Lackey. I'm the branch manager at Allegra Westbrooks Regional Library with Charlotte Mecklenburg Library. I grew up on reading Rainbow, and I started my library career in children's services. So this too is my jam.
Excellent. And also too, we worked in the same world a number of years ago at UNC Charlotte. She worked for a horrible human being and survived it. So I'm ecstatic to see her here today. Well, I have some questions for you, but what were your thoughts about the film and why is Reading Rainbow important to you?
So I grew up on reading Rainbow. I was born in 1980, 43. I'm proud to be 43. We're still here, we're hanging in. I grew up on reading Rainbow. I watched it at home. I'm pretty sure I was one of those VCR kids who watched it at school. I was probably a nerdy kid, a little bit of a weird kid. So when the opportunity presented itself to be a part of this talkback, I jumped at it. I actually was not even the target audience for the ask because I no longer work in children's services, but I was like, please pick me, send me. So that's why I wanted to be a part of today's talkback. I have a niece, she is in the audience, she's 23, and there she is. And I am such an embarrassing aunt, and the whole time I was watching, I had the biggest smile, and I felt like she was reading my thoughts, and I was just embarrassing her by proxy, because this was such a big part of my childhood. And some of the subjects in the film, they took all my lines. Jason Reynolds took my line at the end, and the lady who talked about being a teacher and then a social worker. My mom is a social worker, my dad was a teacher. Like, they took my lines, like I'm supposed to be the librarian. So it's just super exciting to be a part of this. And what about you, Rodney?
First of all, it was so emotional. I was like tearing up. I'm like, why am I tearing up? There were so many things that like, it brought back memories, and I'm 61 years old, so I'm absolutely not the target audience for Reading Rainbow, but I'm aware of it, and I guess I really looked at it in terms of the relevance of the show and the importance of public television and reading, and how easy it is for us to discount things that are vital, and so that really was where my head was at. I wanted to ask you, watching this, are young people still coming into the libraries to read?
Absolutely. There are kids coming in for story time. They're coming in for reading. One of the subjects in the film talked about the Reading Rainbow approach. You have a book, you find something, and then you do it. So one of the things that the children's department at my location, they do, it's called Read a Book, Learn to Cook. And there will be a story that may have, I don't know, there was a book, I can't remember the name of it, shame. But the family in the book, they were of Indian descent, and there were these popsicles that one of the characters was making and selling. And so in our Read a Book, Learn to Cook, the kids read the story and then they followed the recipe. They did not make popsicles, but they made like a lemonade cream pie that was very similar to the recipe that was in the story. So there was a little bit of math, there was a little bit of collaborative and cooperative learning, and then everybody got to have like a yummy treat that they could sample in the library and then have one, because it was a frozen pie, so they took all their ingredients home in a Ziploc bag to put in the freezer for the next day, to have for dessert. So we try to make it relevant. The argument that they talked about in the beginning of the film about how education and literacy were so far apart from television, that's very much the same argument that you see now for screen time. I have a 4-year-old, he slept through the entire screening, he's still asleep, he's going to be up all night. But you hear all this talk about screen time is bad, don't put the kid in front of the screen, but it's a tool. Reading Rainbow was very much a tool. We went to the library. I spent time with my dad after school in his co-worker's library. She was the media specialist. But, watching those books on TV, it introduced me to the books that maybe I would have never thought about. The same way that, screen time has introduced my child to just this ridiculous vocabulary. Well, that and the fact that I talk a lot too. But even things like the song, the engineering of the song. If any of you have children, grandchildren, nieces, or nephews, and you know what CoComelon is, it was that song when he was younger, he just had to hear the beginning of it, and he would run from the other side of the house to see what was happening on CoComelon, just like the engineering of the song. So it's just the same type of thing that's coming full circle. But the short answer to your question is yes. Kids are still coming to the library. They're still coming to read. And kids love the library. We're like rock stars, actually.
Oh, that's actually, well, I'm really happy because I agree. I think librarians are the rock stars. Another question, and I'm not asking you to solve all the world's problems, but when people, because I think of my niece and nephew who live on their tablets, they're always constantly watching programs. And it may just be the grumpy old man in me, like, they need to put that down and read a book. Are we taking them away from reading by giving them screens? Or should we be concerned, or should I calm down?
Well, I don't know. I don't know, but I think it goes back to what they're doing on the tablets and how the tablets are being used. Everything in moderation. So, maybe there's a trade-off between XYZ thing, educational, and ABC thing for fun. And really just finding the balance and finding what's appropriate for your niece and your nephew, because what's appropriate for your niece may not be appropriate for your nephew,
right,
and definitely won't be appropriate for my son, and all kids learn differently.
Yes.
There's this big argument, are audiobooks reading? I have a 40-minute commute. Absolutely it's reading, because that's what I'm listening to on the way down the road. So I think it's all relative, really.
Okay. Just another thought that I had in watching the film. I've been working in children's television for about 20 years now, and when I first started, if you were writing on a series for kids who were like preschool, elementary school, you had a curriculum, and like all of the shows had a curriculum. And now, increasingly, I would say over the last 5 years, there's a larger number of shows for elementary and even preschool that don't have an educational curriculum, because in commercial television world, we have to get eyeballs, and we have to get people to watch. And I was listening to this, and it really made me think, this is why we need the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. We need public television, because there has to be in the space someone who's funding programming, and they're not concerned principally about the profit, because the marketplace is not going to educate our kids in the way that I think they should be. I know that's everything I say now is through the prism of being a grumpy old man, but I just think that it's something that concerns me, that literally there's now children's programming where the only criteria is entertainment.
There's also adult programming where the only criteria is entertainment. And again, you have those checks and balances, and we can't rely on screens or apps or anything to educate our children. So the onus is on the parents, the teachers, the grandparents, the village, the community to make those appropriate choices. I mean, I was so anti-Paw Patrol. I did not want it in my house. I didn't want the song. I didn't want the action figures. And my best friend, she babysits for me on a weekly basis, and she also introduced him to Coco Melon. She introduced him to Coco Melon, and she also introduced him to Paw Patrol, and he loved those things for a season or several, and then eventually they went away. And we have the merchandise and we have the things, but again, we had that balance, and it's okay to have a little entertainment or infotainment, if you will.
Okay. I think, is there anything? Also, I just have to, this is just me, just in a wash of the nostalgia, the fact that they showed Where the Wild Things Are, because that was without question my favorite children's book growing up. I still have it. I love that book. And I just love the celebration of reading. Another question regarding the world of the library. How has the development of social media and screens, how has that impacted your world?
Well, like everyone, of course, we went through the pandemic of 2020, and I started working for the library in 2015. Prior to 2020, there was very little, if any, virtual programming at Charlotte Mecklenburg Library. There was no online book club, there was no virtual story time, everything happened in person. So, of course, like the rest of the world, we had to pivot when the pandemic happened, and we went online. You know, there are story times floating on Facebook now in my living room where I am reading to an audience of children. And you learn, you adapt and you move forward. The library does have an app that people use. You can use it to manage your library account. We partner with lots of vendors for electronic resources, so you can use your library card to get access to free ebooks and audiobooks and periodicals. And even if you have a library card, you can get the Charlotte Observer for free. They don't tell you that.
What?
But if you have a subscription,
Okay, all right.
You can totally cancel it and access the Observer online, though. You can only read it online. You won't get it anymore.
Okay.
But so, we are not anti-technology. We're not anti-app. Again, it's all about how you leverage things.
Okay. All right, that's excellent. I don't know, does anyone else have any questions or any thoughts? Yep.
Well, I have a thought. It's a thought and a question. In the 70s, I worked in New York City for a publishing company that was producing educational materials.
Mm-hmm.
And, and they were distributed all over the country. But what I wonder about is one of the things we did then was distribute films and multimedia kits that would put together these types of concepts, like Sesame Street.
Yeah.
One was based on Free to Be You and Me, if you remember that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, but the thing is, it seems like now, because you don't need these film projectors and all these things, all you have to do, it's a wonderful advancement. All you have to do is put the cassette on. It seems like we should be using these, putting together multimedia kits. And I just want to remind people too that one of the reasons, as I remember, Reading Rainbow was able to start in the 80s, at the beginning of the 80s, was because from the 70s to the 80s, there was suddenly this whole push for including minorities in history, including Black history. Mm-hmm. One of the things we used to laugh about was all these multimedia kits and film strips that called it like Our Friends, the American Indians. It was never inclusive, it was always from one group's point of view. So it was really still the old-fashioned way through the 70s, and then the publishers tried to push for these things, you know, putting out multi-ethnic kits, they used to call it things like Black American History, that kind of thing. But then it went more to television and evolved into Reading Rainbow. That was great, but what I'm wondering is, first of all, you know, as educational materials, I think it's really important also for children to have activity so that they're not just involved by watching. And it seems in the schools, they do that less, but maybe I'm wrong about that. And the other thing is, so that this came out and obviously people are looking back and understanding the importance of reading, what are they really talking about some possibilities of Reading Rainbow coming back and being put on PBS, or is there any kind of push for that?
Well, I've not heard anyone, you know what, as soon as I get home, I'm gonna email Ellen Doherty, who's over at Fred Rogers, to ask if she's heard anything. But I haven't heard anything about Reading Rainbow coming back. It'd be wonderful if it did, but I hadn't heard that. I don't know if you wanted to address anything that she was talking about regarding multimedia.
I think one of the challenges today with the creation of a multimedia kit, such as you were explaining, is that media is ever evolving. And the minute everybody catches on to something, we're on to the next thing. And creating sustainable media is a huge challenge, and much to the point of the film where they talked about the kids being more adept at using the computers. The children are going to know the technology before we do, and when we catch up to create the media, we're going to be on to the next thing. So it does, or evolution is necessary, and I'm sorry, but I just don't know how we fix and how we address that. I also like the point that you mentioned about the diversity of some of the media kits, and even while well-intended but perhaps misguided, you know, as a child of an educator, and my grandfather was a paraprofessional, I didn't need to go to school for Black history because it was super important that I learned Black history at home. But I do remember Mufara's Beautiful Daughters from Reading Rainbow, because it was probably one of the first times that I really thought about Africa, and just, you know, seeing that story, and, you know, just, you know, seeing the representation of the girls in the story. That was very meaningful. I have a coworker who's a few years younger than me, and for her, it was Amazing Grace. She talked about how she always had really short pigtails, and when she saw Grace on the cover of Amazing Grace, she just knew that was her, and that was the book that she always wanted to borrow from the library. So, you know, there, and even now in publishing, there are so many efforts to diversify and share and tell stories that I think it's important that we just harness that and, you know, do what we can to incorporate diversity, just like Reading Rainbow, all sorts of diversity, you know, and share those stories with children. And we did talk a lot about technology and apps and media, but I love what LeVar Burton did in Reading Rainbow, where he holds up the book and he holds it out. That's, you know, what I did for the majority of my tenure as a children's librarian. You hold it in your hands, and I do firmly believe that there is no replacement for that print book in your hands. There's just something about that cannot be replicated. I don't care what the technology does, you can't replicate that. That's my opinion, though.
It's going to be interesting because I think technology is shifting so fast. It's going to be interesting to see what happens next, because I don't know, my love when you talk about books, I love physical books. I love physical books, but also I love old albums. I love the album where I can read the liner notes and they're all there. And my son has never bought an album in his life. He's never had one. Everything he gets, it streams, and it just comes to him. His interaction with music, his interaction with reading is markedly different than mine. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but it's absolutely a different thing. And I don't know, it's a different world. I'm very much on the fence about how their imaginations are good. They are going to be storytellers. They got that. Then the technology, they are masters of. The reading part, I'm sorry, can they read? The kids that come in, and can they read?
Yes.
Okay, good.
There are children who struggle, just like there have
Yes,
always
that's
been
true.
children who
That's true.
struggle. But, you know, there are programs and procedures in place to help those children to get on track. I do think that there is more empathy for children who fall behind now, because we know more about adolescent development, and we know that what is developmentally or age appropriate for one child, it's not one size fit all. Like, we get that
Yes.
now. So I do think that that is a step in the right direction. But the children can read, and for those who have problems, you know, there are, like, we have a volunteer-based program at the library where people come in and they're reading buddies. That's literally what it's called. They come in and they read for 30 minutes with the same child for an entire semester. And for children who are off-put by reading with an adult stranger, they can come in and read to dogs, because the dogs are not going to judge you or correct you. So, you know, the kids can read, and the ones who don't read well are improving. Does anybody else in the audience have any questions or comments that you would like to share? Yes.
Yeah, just to piggyback off this woman's comment or question rather. In this age where there's such a huge push to ban literature,
Yes.
would a show like this, would it survive, or would it just take just a much more massive support than what was fostered years ago when it started?
I think markets are so overly saturated, and as much as I love reading Rainbow, I think that it would be very niche. I think that it would be the people like me and my sister who grew up on it, who are raising children now, who make it a point to, you know, really buy into that type of programming. I think that it's quality, I think that it's great, but there's just so many things out there that, as much as I would love to see it succeed, I just don't know.
You know, actually, that's a great question and a wonderful point. I think that we are in a place where the audience has been so segmented that one of the things with my niece and nephew, because I work in children's television, it's like, oh, do you want to see this? Do you want to see this? They wanted to see shows I had never heard of before. I'm like, that's what I do, but it's like literally they were YouTube, these real niche things that they see on YouTube. And so part of that, because I want to address both parts of your question. One is the world of media is so vast, it's hard to break through, and that's one of the reasons why I think the big boys, the Viacom or whatever, they are deeply invested in trying to create a brand so that there are all these ancillary streams of revenue to support it. I get it. It's hard to break through. So I don't know, without the platform, if it's on the platform of PBS, then I think it'll break through, because there are audiences who are dedicated to supporting PBS. Outside of PBS, I think it would have a real hard time. I think in terms of the diversity, I absolutely can see another LeVar Burton being chosen as the host. I think that we are in a real interesting place because there's this major national push against diversity. And I think we're at the very beginning of it, and it's really disconcerting. It'll be real interesting to see the trickle-down effect of it, because like my sister works in, her office used to be called DEI, and now they've changed it because they're like, oh, no, anything with DEI, they're gonna get rid of. So it's so interesting that there is a push against diversity. So I just think it's gonna be interesting, and I think all of our antennae are up to see where it goes. But I think him as a host, I don't think that would be a problem. The content of those stories, even some of the stories that they showed here, I'm like, you know what, it's so interesting. In a certain way, I think that we're in a real conservative atmosphere where I can clearly see them going, oh, hell no, we're not running that. So, I'm sorry, there was another question. Yeah?
Yes. There is a current iteration of Reading Rainbow. There was a Kickstarter in 2016.
Oh, excellent.
It was targeting a $1 million goal, and it reached that in under 24 hours and reached $5 million. So they do have an app and I think an online program that does partner with schools.
Excellent.
But it's supposed to provide that resource to especially and specifically underserved or Title I related communities.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And so it exists as an app? Okay.
It lives primarily as, I believe, a free app or a subscription-based app if the school has access to the program they're chosen when they apply for it.
Fantastic.
And LeVar Burton is also in charge of that as well.
That's excellent,
But,
thank you.
Yes, and I'm a person who I have taught primarily in Title I public schools. That's also the kind of schooling I grew up with as well. So it's preferential to me anyways. But I learned through my experience with teaching, and because I come from a family of teachers, I've seen how it's changed from how they have explained the experience to me. Not having it myself, obviously, but with how things are always framed in terms of administrative preferences, but it's very prescriptive, and it's very, a lesson plan is not an idea board or a vision board. It's a point A, point B process that you're going through line by line.
Yeah.
And I have never ever been particularly good at that kind of method. So I actually found that the less prescriptive and commonly used way for people who don't like meeting those rigid lesson plan standards has actually been the Reading Rainbow method, because I found that with, not necessarily with the film aspect of it, but I have found that, like for instance, whenever I read A Raisin in the Sun with my students, they didn't understand how impactful redlining or discriminatory housing processes were with Chicago back then, and how it still impacts it today, whether or not people would say that out loud. But not only did they get to learn so much about how difficult it is to have your own financial literacy when you have no experience with having money in your pocket in the first place, but with how on top of that, no matter how much you try or how good you do, there are certain institutional practices that will consistently push back against you. And if you don't stick together, it's really hard to beat that. But they found that not just through reading, but acting the parts and learning about the history and arguing about money in the classroom, when they may not have experience holding it in their hands at a $100,000 amount on top of that. I found that to be extremely engaging, especially for my students who were very much below reading level. And they would find the enjoyment of getting to play the role of a family that, without money in the way, was generally very well put together, but when they threw it in the mix, they had to reevaluate the value and meaning of their relationships. But yeah, I think the Reading Rainbow method in practical use is very frequently used, but only I think by a lot of educators who are comfortable going outside of the prescriptive method that guarantees a good evaluation,
Yes.
or actively push back against it, or just very bad at meeting the prescriptive method.
First, I want to applaud you. Like, you are an awesome teacher. That sounds like a wonderful lesson. So that's great. And I don't know if we are at a turning point, but I'm so curious because media is becoming bigger and bolder and bigger, and I want to know how, I'm curious, and maybe you have some thoughts on it, is how can we use media in a way that can benefit students? Like Reading Rainbow was phenomenal. Is there something else that we could be doing to, literacy is obviously a big part of what their mission was, but in other areas of education as well, is there something that television or social media or film can do to reach audiences beyond, and I'm not poo-pooing entertainment, but beyond simply entertaining?
I'm sure there's something that can be done. To the point of the film, one of the first things that LeVar Burton said about the program was, we're not teaching children to read, we're teaching a love of reading. And to your point, I think as an educator, perhaps, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm gonna put some words in your mouth, but it seems to me that in your classroom, the idea of learning and piquing that curiosity and creating some real world experiences is a little more important to you than, you know, those very prescriptive bottom lines. And so I think if we continue to create avenues for this exploration, these real world experiences, that we just may tap into something. What that is, unfortunately, I do not know. I remember Saturday morning TV after cartoons, you know, once we grew out of that. And I don't even know if Saturday morning cartoons exist anymore, but a lot of the major networks started going to educational programs. So you got a lot of the Daryl Hannahs, the Animal Explorations, and all of these really sort of like non-fiction type things. I feel like that is kind of like a door into, you know, exploring, you know, new avenues for learning. Even in school systems and public education right now, there's a bigger push for reading non-fiction texts. Some people love it, some people don't necessarily care for it, but it's a truly great way to learn. So I think with the way things are going, the opportunities and resources that we have now, we're at the door, you know.
Okay,
but
I think so too.
I don't know when we get there, and I don't know what it is, but I am excited to see it.
Okay, excellent. I agree with you. Any other comments, questions?
I'm a pre-K teacher in the CMS district at a Title I school as well, and we actually, in our curriculum, read a lot of Reading Rainbow books. So it makes me really happy because they bring back like memories for me, and then I have like a joy when I'm sharing them.
Yeah.
So yeah, this movie was really heartwarming for me.
It really was.
Yeah.
It really was. It was so sweet.
Also, like, you were talking about how do we present this to students, and in the pre-K classroom, we like, we show children that there are different avenues to enjoy literature. So we use the books, we listen to a CD, you know, with a book. We might view the story or on a Reading Rainbow episode. So I think it's important to do that, but also like an experiential learning in a pre-K room. We have like a dramatic play center, and we have materials there so kids can act out real life scenarios. So we really try to make connections with real world to literacy with
That's
our
excellent.
children.
That's excellent, that's excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
One thought that I had while watching this was just like how heartwarming it was to hear from the like children book reviewers back then and how it impacted their experiences and everything. And this is kind of a comment / question for you, Rodney. So in case you haven't heard of it, there's currently a docuseries that's on HBO Max. It's called Quiet on Set. And it's just about really horrible things that have happened on children television sets. So my question to you, as someone who works in children's television and is a screenwriter, how do you / your team ensure that children have an experience like Reading Rainbow, where they feel empowered, where they feel like they have a voice, whether they are participants in the actual series or show or an individual watching it?
And I haven't seen the series. Coincidentally, I was just talking to my brother about it this morning. He saw it. I think that, well, the Reading Rainbow experience is absolutely different than being on All That or some of these other Nick shows, in that those were child actors who had to be there for like 8 hours a day, and then they had handlers, and they were in a world. The book reviewers, they're just coming in, they're doing it, their parents are always right there, and then they're escorted off. I'm sure they were paid something, but the production only had access to them for a little while, and they weren't necessarily child actors. It's a different world when you have cast these kids, and not only the kids, but their parents are deeply invested in being in show business, and then there are predators that are everywhere. And so it's a very different world. And I'm not aware of, well, no, there are a number of PBS series that have a child cast. I would, and I haven't seen the series, but I would throw the big responsibility on the producers, because their number one job is the protection of the children. And I'm not trying to be like, but literally, it's like they're the most vulnerable. If they're an adult actor, they can handle themselves. Kids can't, so you have to take care of them. And I don't know the particulars of what happened to these kids, but yeah, I would put the responsibility primarily on the producers of the show.
So sorry to be a downer.
No.
Rodney?
Yes.
I just want to say, because I taped a segment when I was a kid, as a child actor, I taped a segment for Reading Rainbow.
Oh!
It didn't air. They didn't do that segment, but I remember taping the book review. And that's exactly how it was on that, because my mom, who spoke her, she was there, and I remember it's like,
Verified. It's not just a story.
it was like just 20 minutes while we were filming. And I mean, I did other things where it was like, you know, they wanted it, and a lot of it was also, not to blame, but it was the parents.
Yeah.
You know, like my parents weren't, I don't know, it seemed like willing to sell their kids out at the right price. You know, my parents just weren't gonna do that. But
We only considered it.
they never offered it.
Right.
What was your book?
Yeah, I don't remember. I was really annoyed that they didn't air it. And I think I pressed it out of my mind. But I don't know, they said at the time, I remember them saying at the time that they decided not to pursue that theme.
Okay.
And before I saw this, I thought that was a lot more BS than, because they were doing it so thematically. I think when I heard that as a kid, I thought they just didn't like me and don't want to hurt my feelings.
Yeah. God bless you. And I know that it must have hurt, and that's one of the, even adult actors get their feelings hurt very easy, and it is so much bigger for kids. Yeah, I've seen kids burst into tears, so it's hard.
But I think I'd rather have taped it and not have aired. And also that day, my mom was in the elevator and embarrassed herself in front of Howard Cosell. So that made it worth it, I feel.
Good,
You know, something came out of it,
good, good.
you
Yeah,
know.
please
She
say
just-
what you
she
mean by
just stuttered.
embarrass. What did you mean by embarrass?
It's like when you meet someone really famous and you tell them that they're famous. I think she said to
That
him,
was what it was.
I know you, but you don't know me. And that was like it, and I think he probably said something like, all right. And that's it. CBS Studios. That's what it is for.
Thank you, that was
Seventh
great.
grade.
That was
By
great.
the way, was that, can I just ask you know Mike Collins
Mm-mm.
from WFAE, he lives in Charlotte?
Oh, yes, yes.
That was him in the film.
Yeah, I was there twice.
Oh, really?
I
Yeah, he
didn't
was sitting around at when they first aired he's the guy, yeah, he's at a table interview. And it cuts to him briefly at first, right after they say they're airing it.
Oh, okay. You know, I
And
know
later
his,
cuts
I
back
know
to-
his voice. I've never
He's
seen
very
him.
young.
Yeah,
Okay,
Very
that's gotta
young.
be Mike
okay.
Collins, yeah.
Oh, that's excellent.
Fun
That's
fact.
excellent.
I just want to make my aunt feel good. He was smiling and thinking he was embarrassing me, but I was actually thinking how great this was. And, you know, of course, I grew up on books because you love books. So, but it's truly amazing to see something like this because, like, I work in the school system as well, not as an educator per se, but I see kids who don't know how to read or who needs help reading. And I just wonder, like, if they had the stuff that I had, would they be able to do something different? Because they're just sitting in class, just looking around as the teacher's reading them, not interested. And so it's truly good to see something like this.
Yeah.
And I know the chance is set for life because we read now, but it's like truly amazing. But I wonder, what are the kids in the middle supposed to do? Like, I had what I needed and he has what he needs, but what happens when the kids are still growing up and they still don't know what to do?
I don't know.
Questions that need answers. And, you know, for educators like yourself and your mom, and although, you know, you're a paraprofessional, you are very much an educator. Don't ever discount your role in the school system, because people like you, and of course the community of the village, your friendly, lovely librarians who can hopefully help to fill some of those gaps. We may not be able to save everyone, but you know, we'll certainly do our best to serve where we can.
Mr. Stringfellow, I do have a question for you specifically.
Yep.
So when it comes to the field that you work in, I'm just curious because you might have a pretty good scope of it from where you stand,
Mhm.
and I'm just curious myself.
Mhm.
But when it comes to production for children's television at the moment, do you see that there are more people who have a knowledgeable background of childhood development actually attempting to involve themselves in these kind of efforts? Or less so than before? I'm just curious.
No, actually, that's a great question. In general, I would say there's less, but that's largely because I think the world of children's television has expanded so much. There's so many more platforms, there's so many more channels and programs out there, and the people who enter it, by and large, they're creatives and they're trying to get their idea out there. Now, for every preschool show that I've ever worked on, once the show has been greenlit, they hire educators to come in, and there's like a whole army of them. And so once you hit 6 to 11, no, they're not really looking for educators at that point. They do have researchers to see, do audiences like it, but there aren't educators once you hit 6 to 11. But 5 and under, chances are the big boys are still going to have educational consultants, and that's a big field. They are gold, and they call the shots. I've absolutely seen educational consultants say, like, no, we're not going to do that. And so, so that's a whole field in and of itself, and they typically aren't the ones who drive the show. They are brought on afterwards.
That's so unfortunate because I was a ghostwriter fan when I was like, thank you. I was like, is anybody, I'm trying to see your faces, like, is anybody in here gonna know what I'm talking about? Ghostwriter, and then Carmen Sandiego, even though I was not smart enough for Carmen Sandiego, but again, though I wasn't. If I got an answer right on Carmen Sandiego, it was just like, oh yes, but that was few and far between. Those kids were brilliant. But, you know, those shows, of course, were public broadcasting.
Yes.
It, you know,
Yes.
so
Yes.
so they were vetted and they had the researchers, and it is so unfortunate that there seems to be less of a space for that now, because those things were gold.
They were.
Gold.
Absolutely. And it's been written, the history of children's television. It's so amazing to see the evolution of it and how we grow up with it. We think that's the way it is. And it's like, no. If you go 10 years back, it's different. If you go 10 years forward, it's going to be different again. Legislation passes that changes the landscape all the time. It's fascinating. And I think that increasingly everything is so segmented, and unless I'm cynical. I'm cynical and world weary, so please forgive me. But I
I
tend
have
to.
young nieces and nephews, and I'm observing the differences in the media they consume.
Yes.
And I'll see Rachel, Miss Rachel,
Yes.
which is a current popular, but that's
Yep.
a qualified individual doing it.
Yeah.
And then I'll see Spidey and Friends, and see that my 3-year-old niece is incapable of processing anything useful from it other than stimulation.
Well, I don't think Spidey and Friends are trying to give you anything other than like.
Stimulation.
Yeah. That's what it's for. So it's fascinating. The history of children's television is really interesting, and I think increasingly there are going to be people, unless you're willing to pay for it, that like, because I think Sesame Street is on HBO now, right?
Yes, that was so heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's Sesame Street's on HBO, and you're increasingly, to get the good stuff, you're going to have to pay. It's amazing.
I don't mean to be cynical, but what Spidey and Friends purports to give you is the same thing that Paw Patrol does. It's collaborative work. It's what is it? Teamwork, problem solving. There is none of that. I'm sorry. This is just my opinion, but there is none of that. It's just a mess and a waste of time and jumping off couches. So when it's over, that's what they do. They spin around and then they jump off the couch. But so you are not wrong. You are not wrong in what you're seeing with your niece.
Yeah.
But that's what they aim to give you, or what they claim to aim to give you.
We need to just read books.
We should probably start wrapping up, but I
absolutely.
did want to end it. I know, of course, we should all read books, but if you had to give 1 or 2 recommendations for children's television, either that is coming out today or that you can watch on a streaming channel, what would it be?
Okay, this is going to be, this is so self-serving.
Do it.
I apologize. It's
Don't.
so self-serving. I'm a writer on the PBS Kids series Alma's Way. It's about a little Puerto Rican girl who lives in the Bronx. And it does have a curriculum, and I love it. I've written for some incredibly curriculum-heavy shows, but that one, the curriculum is folded into it beautifully. Also, and I have nothing to do with Bluey. I love Bluey. Bluey is like the jam. Wow. Bluey is really well done. A wonderful social emotional curriculum that they pull off there. So really good.
I will too plug Alma's Way. We are not fan favorites yet, but maybe we will be. We'll invest a little more time with it. We have seen it, but it's he consumes a lot. For someone who cannot read, he finds the most obscure and random things, not that Alma is obscure and random, online, and he gravitates towards certain things. So a while ago, Nickelodeon put out Team Umizoomi, which is my son's current favorite. And it's kind of heartbreaking for me because it's math. It's all math and math concepts, patterns, logical reasoning, and he loves it. He's the best counter in his class. It's not me, it was totally Team Umizoomi. And like, he's all about units of measure, and just, he can do simple addition and subtraction and really like parse logic for a 4-year-old, and it's all about Team Umizoomi. The unfortunate thing is, it's old. I don't know when it went off the air. We do watch it on streaming, but when someone says, well, what's your favorite? I want to get you something for Christmas, for your birthday, you can't find it, which I guess is kind of a good thing because we don't need anything else in our house. Team Umizoomi. Oh, and then I blanked on the other one, but I too am a big fan of Bluey. If you are a parent of small children, do not aspire to be as good a parent as Chili and Bingo, because you will fail. They are great.
Oh my
They are
God.
never tired. They play with their kids. It's full imagination. They are invested.
Yes, they
I am
are.
tired, but Chili and Bingo are great. So don't set yourself up for failure thinking you will be like them, because you won't.
No, you cannot live up to their high standard.
And the back of their car is dirty, so that is realistic, but you might be able to attain that part. But no.
So I guess that's it. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. You were wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me.
Just saying here, this was wonderful, and I loved the film. Thank you, Claire.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mike.